Okay, I think we can start. Ishraq, can we start? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are joining us from the world today. My name is Arif Suleiman. I am the Director of Economic Research and Statistics at the ISDB Institute. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to welcome you today to the 15th ISDB Global Forum on Islamic Finance, which is being held on the margins of the 46th ISDB annual meeting. I hope you're all staying safe and in the best of health, inshallah. The theme for the forum this year is the role of Islamic finance in the post-COVID-19 economic recovery of ISDB member countries. Before we begin, we'll get into a few quick housekeeping rules. The Q&A is open and you can access that at the bottom. The chat function has been disabled. There is simultaneous translation in French, Arabic, English, and also the Russian language. The session is also being streamed live on YouTube, and you can communicate also via the YouTube chat. So if you have any queries, concerns, comments, please raise that either in the chat or on YouTube or on the Q&A in the Zoom meeting itself. If we get a chance, we'll respond to the specific Q&As related to any of the panelists. So before we go any further, let us start with a recitation from the Holy Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم.
صدق الله العظيم. I would like to take this opportunity to call upon Samuel Suellem, who is the Acting Director General of the Islamic Development Bank Institute and the Chief Economist of the ISDB Group, to share with us his welcoming remarks. Sami, over to you.
Thank you, Arif. On behalf of the ISDB Group and on behalf of my colleagues at the Institute, I'm glad to welcome distinguished guests, speakers, panelists, and all participants. The 15th Global Forum of Islamic Finance this year is unique in integrating principles of Islamic finance with searching for solutions for economic challenges facing our member countries and communities, as you can see from the program of the forum. This integration reflects the mission of the ISDB Institute, which is not only the beacon of knowledge in Islamic finance, but also it is now hosting the function of the chief economist of the ISDB group. Good economics is Islamic economics by nature. Islamic finance is not only about the legal structure of transactions, it is in addition, and more importantly, a framework for achieving economic progress and sustainable development as required by the objectives of Islamic finance and Maqasid al-Sharia. We are honored this forum to have the newly elected president and chairman of the ISDB group, Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasser, to deliver the opening speech. Dr. Al-Jasser was eager to join us live. Unfortunately, he has to travel from Jeddah to Tashkent, so now he's on the air together with the ISDB group delegates to attend the annual meetings there. We wish him and all the delegates a safe trip and productive meetings. Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasser has a very rich career. He was the executive director of Saudi Arabia at the International Monetary Fund. He was the governor of the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia. He was the Minister of Economy and Planning, among other leading positions locally and internationally. Without further delay, I invite you to listen to His Excellency's opening speech.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of the Islamic Development Bank Group, I welcome you all to the 15th IDB Global Forum on Islamic Finance. I thank all the distinguished speakers and panelists for joining us today. We have all been witness to the damage the COVID-19 pandemic has inflicted on the world economy. However, as the world edges toward the end of the pandemic, the actual scale of the damage and the volume of resources required to revive economies are becoming more apparent. Therefore, countries and development partners must come together to identify strategies for achieving a sustainable recovery. Human development is a crucial goal of IDB to maintain and promote human dignity in its member countries. Achieving this goal starts with reducing all forms of poverty, particularly in health and education, which are essential for building human capital. The fight against poverty was acknowledged by the Millennium Development Goals in 2000 and later by the Global Agenda of Sustainable Development Goals. These international efforts have contributed significantly to putting poverty on a downward trend. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, has complicated the fight against poverty. It threatens to reverse many of the hard-earned gains. For the first time in 20 years, extreme global poverty is expected to rise, with estimates suggesting that the additional poverty count attributable to COVID-19 could hit 163 million in 2021. Equally challenging is the rising inequalities. Before the pandemic, inequality was affecting more than 2/3 of the world's population. This situation has been exacerbated by COVID-19, as it had a disproportionately adverse effect on the incomes of vulnerable groups. Given that 1/3 of the populations in our member countries live in multidimensional poverty, it is not surprising that fighting poverty has always been at the heart of IDB's country partnerships and engagements. As a development institution, we had to step up our efforts to ensure a more inclusive recovery in our member countries. With this objective in mind, the bank revived its partnership with the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. Building on the success of our previous collaborations, we have undertaken to analyze multidimensional poverty in 42 IDB member countries to help strengthen our evidence-based policies and interventions. It is encouraging that several member countries have completely reduced their multidimensional poverty. Highlighting these countries' successes motivates policymakers and development institutions that reducing poverty remains attainable despite the formidable challenges. Today, we look forward to a fruitful discussion on how COVID-19 transforms the fight against multidimensional poverty and how to draw upon these success stories. The importance of infrastructure investments for developing economies is a crucial challenge for many of the member countries. Poor infrastructure impedes development. It has a domino effect on all aspects of life. Industry resource forecasts that an average of US $3.7 trillion of infrastructure investments will be needed annually until 2035 for countries to keep pace with projected GDP growth. The MENA region, for example, will need to spend at least 8.2% of its GDP to meet its infrastructure goals by 2030, a big jump from the 3% average in the past decade. Infrastructure in our member countries is expected to attract around 72% of total SDGs financing needs. The COVID-19 pandemic comes into the picture again, stalling infrastructure development as overall public sector debt levels in developing economies hit record levels, with economies facing the effects of extended lockdowns, declining productivity, and an increasing shortage of government funds. In the face of weak public fiscal space, bridging the infrastructure development needs in developing countries and emerging markets requires much greater private sector involvement. At this point, multilateral development financing institutions, together with their member countries, can step in to unlock private sector infrastructure financing at scale. The growing Islamic finance industry, with a recorded asset value between $2.2 trillion and $2.8 trillion in 2019, can serve as an essential source of finance for infrastructure development in developing countries and emerging markets. We welcome the joint World Bank IDB effort to develop the Islamic Finance for Infrastructure PPP projects reference guide. This guide aims to shed light on the essential aspects of Islamic finance related to infrastructure public-private partnerships. It also provides extensive Sharia-compliant case studies and legal templates that match the different structures discussed. As countries try to find sustainable and complementary sources of financing for their post-COVID-19 economic recovery, the reference guide can be a helpful tool. I am pleased to note that we will present the awards to the winners of the relaunched IDB Prize for Impactful Achievement in Islamic Economics for 2021. The decades-long prize attests to IDB's continuing support for innovation and progress in Islamic economics and finance to realize its potential for socio-economic development. I congratulate Launch Good and Seed Out for winning first and second places respectively. The two platforms have excellent, innovative, and impactful roles in crowdfunding worthwhile projects, contributing to inclusive finance and productive economic activity using Islamic principles. I hope the award will encourage the winners and other innovators to develop more practical initiatives and innovative projects for broader economic development. I am confident that this forum will reach helpful ideas to help our societies recover from the economic shocks caused by the pandemic. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Al-Jasser for sharing with us his views and perspectives on this critical area on the role of Islamic finance in a post-COVID world. Some of the key notable areas that he highlighted was the issue of human development, rising inequalities, and the need to ensure a more inclusive recovery in order to help restore dignity. Dr. Al-Jasser also emphasized that infrastructure, or the lack thereof, is one of the most serious impediments to development, and a collaborative effort is required to unlock private sector infrastructure financing at scale. These are two key areas of our deliberation in the two panel sessions this afternoon or this morning, depending where you are. As Sami mentioned in his welcoming remarks, good economics is Islamic economics. With that, let us turn our attention to the IsDB Prize for Impactful Achievement in Islamic Economics. This prize has its origins in the IsDB Prize in Islamic Economics, Banking and Finance, which has, after 32 years, been expanded to reward outstanding achievements, both in knowledge creation and in implementing innovative development solutions, guided by the principles of Islamic economics. I would like to call upon Sami to present the IsDB Prize for Impactful Achievement in Islamic Economics. Sami?
Thank you, Brother Arif. On behalf of the Islamic Development Bank, I am delighted to present the award to the winners. As indicated already, the IsDB Prize for Impactful Achievement in Islamic Economics has two branches, one for knowledge achievement and one for innovative development project. And this year, the category is for the innovative development projects. The prize comes with a certificate and a cash award of $100,000 for the first place winner, and a certificate and a cash award of $70,000 for the second place winner. The first place winner of the prize is LaunchGood platform, which you can see the plate on the screen. LaunchGood is an innovative crowdfunding platform that harnesses technology to bring Islamic values of helping the community to modern times using the digital space and innovative technologies. The platform provides a decentralized and accessible means for participants to raise money for important projects and have a direct and positive impact on their community. Since launching about 7 years ago, LaunchGood has proven itself to be highly scalable, having supported over 28,000 campaigns and raised over $200 million for various projects. Congratulations to LaunchGood. The second place winner is Seed Out. Seed Out is a platform for crowdfunding and supporting micro entrepreneurs with the vision of creating sustainable value to the communities. Seed Out's approach is to identify prospective entrepreneurs and offer them support in a unique manner. The platform's original innovation is to provide financing in kind. This gives Seed Out good control over the proceeds and allows for the buyer or the beneficiary to focus on his or her business. In many cases, this provides better discipline and focus on performance than paying cash directly. Till date, Seed Out has disbursed more than $500,000 and has successfully raised and supported more than 1,100 micro entrepreneurs. Its efforts have resulted in more than 3,000 children being sent to school. Congratulations to Seed Out. I'm happy to mention that the prize certificates will be sent to the winner, to the two winners by express mail. The money has already been transferred, just for you to know. Okay, so may I now call each of the two winners to say a few words about their platforms. I should highlight, however, that there will be a separate session in the future for each of these platforms to provide detailed overview and description of their work. Mr. Chris Abdulrahman, founder and CEO of LaunchGood, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much to Dr. Sami. We're very honored. I wanted to share a few remarks. As I mentioned, LaunchGood is incredibly honored to receive the IsDB Prize for Impactful Achievement in Islamic Economics. But I want to share a personal story. I became Muslim. You're probably wondering why is someone named Chris accepting this award. I became Muslim actually 20 years ago, almost exactly 20 years ago, in a small farm town in Western Massachusetts, mostly from reading two books, the Quran and the autobiography of Malcolm X. Soon after, though, I got to meet Muslims. My first teacher was actually from Saudi. He was himself a graduate student in America. The first imam I met was Lebanese. The local person in our community who kind of took me under his wing was a Pakistani doctor, along with a Black or African-American tennis coach. I attended the University of Michigan, where I built diverse friendships with Muslims whose family came from all corners of the world, from Malaysia to India to Egypt and more. Upon graduation, I was blessed to travel, including the Hajj, Morocco, Jordan, Turkey, Indonesia, so many more countries. And I noticed something throughout all these interactions. Muslims are really incredible. I honestly believe we have the kindest, most hospitable, and connected community in the world. We also come from a remarkable heritage, a tree whose roots are deep, and whose fruits have forever benefited humanity, and seeds have traveled far and wide. And now the time has come for our generation to sprout, to bear our own fruits and benefit humanity. And I pray that Launch Good and Seed Out and ISDP are three of those seeds, and we continue to grow and give back. The world is in need of the good that we Muslims have within us. Let's show them what we have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. May I now call Mr. Zain Ashraf, President and Founder of Seed Out. Brother Zain.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Al Jasser, Chairman Islamic Development Bank Group, Dr. Sami, and all the eminent experts and scholars from the ISDB group. I am really honored to be here and so grateful for being a recipient of this highly prestigious award of impactful achievement in Islamic economics. It is indeed a great achievement for Seed Out in my country, Pakistan, as we all realize the scale of this award, which makes us even more proud. As you know that Seed Out is Pakistan's first interest-free crowdfunding platform, which is working to alleviate poverty by establishing micro-entrepreneurs through interest-free microfinancing. To date, we have raised around 1,500 plus micro-entrepreneurs, including women, disabled, minorities, transgenders, and while impacting more than 7,000 lives. Not only this, Seed Out has sent around 4,200 kids back to school. We believe in creating an impact by not only handing over hard cash to our beneficiaries, but to execute businesses through asset-based financing. And we have also established a unique nexus between financial inclusion and technological advancement, providing maximum level of transparency to our donors. We have a vision to provide self-enabling and inclusive entrepreneurial opportunities in an attempt to alleviate poverty by developing micro-entrepreneurs. So we look forward to enhancing Seed Out's operations all over Pakistan and across borders and accessible to everyone. We believe on sustainable growth of the enterprises we are helping since beginning. Seed Out is also ensuring proper operating procedures, implementing in organizations for capacity building, growth, and sustainability. In the end, I would like to thank my parents for their prayers, our donors, our supporters, all the honorable ISDB board members, dignitaries for nominating Seed Out at this award. And I also like to congratulate Launch Good for this amazing achievement. And I believe that together we can make millions of tomorrows better than yesterday. Thank you.
Congratulations, Chris from Launch Good and Zain from Seed Out and the two respective teams. Indeed, remarkable achievements on both sides. As Dr. Jarfan mentioned in his initial intervention, it's all about doing this at scale. So that's where we want to see this, and we hope that your works inspire others to innovate and also have a meaningful impact on development, not just in their respective countries, but globally. As the knowledge beacon of the Islamic Development Bank Group, the ISDB Institute will be launching 3 flagship reports today. And during this 15th ISDB Global Forum on Islamic Finance. Now, we will launch one in each of the sessions. The first one that we will launch is the report on artificial intelligence and Islamic finance, a catalyst for financial inclusion. As we're all aware, artificial intelligence and Islamic finance, this report highlights the hurdles that micro, small, medium enterprises face in accessing credits, and also highlights the benefits of using AI within an Islamic finance framework. We will launch this report via a short video that we'll play now. The access to the actual report itself, we will share the link in the Q&A and also on the comment section in the YouTube channel. So we'll kick off with the launch of this report. Please play the video. Congratulations to the team for this timely report on artificial intelligence and Islamic finance. It is without doubt that AI and digital technologies will play an even larger role in Islamic finance as we welcome the fourth industrial revolution and embrace the post-COVID-19 world. Moving on to this panel session, and I'll now switch gears and put on a different hat as the moderator of the session. The theme for the second session is multidimensional poverty in ISDB member countries. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce a good friend, a global development practitioner, one individual that's widely recognized and acclaimed on the landscape, someone very passionate about development, Dr. Bambang Susantono, who is the Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development at the Asian Development Bank. Dr. Susantono has an expansive portfolio at ADB, being responsible for sustainable development and climate change, economic research, regional cooperation, and also the communications at ADB. Clearly a very wide and diverse portfolio and very broad shoulders as well to be able to manage all of that. Prior to the Asian Development Bank, Dr. Susantono was also Deputy Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development in Indonesia, and he's also held several strategic leadership roles across Asia and the world. Bambang, your CV is way too long for us to do you any justice. So without much ado, let me hand over to you for your keynote address. Dr. Susantono, over to you.
Thank you, Brother Arif. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished guests, colleagues at the Islamic Development Bank, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where your locations. It is a great pleasure for me to join all of you in these distinguished panel discussions. First of all, allow me to thank and wishing ISDB a great success in this year annual meeting. May I have my slides, please? Great. Next slide, please. Let's go straight. Okay. The pandemic has shown that we are facing one of the greatest challenges of our generations. The COVID-19 global pandemic continues to surge in waves. Some countries have gone through as many as 5. Over the past several months, several of our members have seen new or renewed outbreaks as more infectious variants spread rapidly. The incredible speed at which vaccination were researched, created, tested, and now are being distributed offers hope that we will be able to control or at least lessen the impact of new infections. However, progress in getting people inoculated in many of our developing member countries remains uneven and below the world average. Aside from the supply constraint, we are facing degrees of vaccination hesitancy, either due to the misinformation or cultural constraint. I believe governments are working hard to overcome these barriers. Next slide, please. As 2020 began last year, we expected most economies in our regions to continue their robust growth, with developing Asia expected to grow over 5% on average. Then the pandemic struck with devastating impact. GDP growth, which over time is linked to changes in living standard, was basically wiped out last year. In fact, GDP across developing Asia fell by 0.1% in 2020, the first contraction in the region in 6 decades. As more vaccines are distributed and inoculation arise, we expect GDP growth to begin recovering in many economies as countries gradually reduce restrictions and continue to resume economic activity. But this remains to be seen. Next slide, please. Over the long run, the pandemic's effect will likely disrupt GDP per capita growth as well. Instead of returning quickly to previous growth trends in line with a quick V-shaped recovery, it is now highly probable that living standards in many countries will not return to their pre-COVID-19 trajectories for many years, and we may witness a slower shoe-shaped or U-shaped rebound. We can see in the slide the cases in several countries. And the pace at which they recover will largely depend on how well policymakers directly manage the virus spread and the extent to which they have the capability of offering policy support. Next slide, please. The impact of COVID-19 on our member economies will depend on several factors, including the degree of economic integrations. One research in IsDB found a distinct U-shaped curve between trade integration and the size of COVID-19 shocks. In the data, it appears that higher global value chains participation is associated with larger negative shocks until a rate of about 45% of GVC participation in 2019, after which it becomes associated with smaller negative shocks. While no prescriptive conclusions regarding an optimal GVC global value chain participation rate should be taken from these outcomes, the data does point to a reduced impact of COVID-19 for countries that are either highly integrated or highly unconnected from the global economies. Of course, further researches will reveal more factors behind correlations of the global value chain's participation and the impact of COVID-19. Next slide, please. One area which is now being widely researched is what will be the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on poverty reductions. Most countries in developing Asia have done an excellent job at reducing extreme poverty. I personally hope that the pandemic put only a temporary halt to that progress. Our estimates show that last year, the number of people in Asia and the Pacific living below the $1.9 per day poverty line increased by 78.3 million. That is relative to what we would expect had there been no pandemic. Based on our current GDP growth forecast, the number should decline soon. But the point is that many people remain vulnerable to shocks, whether economic, health-related, or social in nature. Next slide, please. So this is a good time to stress that we see poverty as multi-dimensional concept. It encompasses all the various deprivations experienced by poor people in their daily life. It includes poor health, lack of education, inadequate living standards, disempowerment due to gender or disability, inferior quality of work, the threat of violence, and living in areas that are environmentally hazardous. And there are others. I would like to outline the impact the pandemic has had on two major areas. First, the disruption in education due to school closures, and second, the renewed challenges to food security. Next slide, please. As we all know, education plays a vital role in the social development and economic potential of the next generations. When COVID-19 emerged as a global threat in 2020, the economic consequences of lockdown measures were the first concern among policymakers, educationalists, and other stakeholders. But that was closely followed by concern over the impact of school closures. In half of our developing member countries, schools were closed for over 200 days through the end of April this year. In Bangladesh, schools have been closed for more than 300 days. Only a handful of countries managed to keep schools open continuously, and those were in Central Asia and a few in the Pacific. Another concern is the digital divide and how to adequately invest to ensure every student can access the tools they need. While schools across the region are using remote instructions, many students have limited or no access to computers or the internet. This limits their ability to learn from home and results in significant learning losses. We cannot allow this deficiency to worsen inequality, either within or across countries. Next slide, please. So let me give you an example. Our economists at IsDB use the latest data on school closures, remote learning effectiveness, and expected earning gains from education to quantify just how much we could lose future earnings for many developing economies in Asia. On average, Asia's students have already lost nearly 1/3 of a school year, and that was just for 2020. These losses will only be compounded if schools continue to remain fully or partially closed. And given the rate at which infections are spreading across several countries in South and Southeast Asia, we expect learning losses to continue to build. These losses translate into substantial reductions in future productivity and lifetime earnings. The total loss in lifetime earnings from school closures could reach as high as 7.6% of developing Asia's GDP in 2020. If we can provide better remote learning, perhaps to the extent in higher income country, we could change the picture dramatically. Another critical physical benefit of going to school is nutrition. Given the role schools play in providing healthy meals to children in many countries, school closures also risk leaving medium and long-term scars by leaving vulnerable students with lower quality diets. These factors accumulate and cut into living standards over time. Next slide, please. Another dimension of poverty is access to food. This has become a growing problem during the pandemic due to its impact on employment and income. Globally, the number of people experiencing severe food insecurity increased by 148 million to 928 million in 2020, or 12% of the world's populations. That jump was equal to the previous 5 years combined. Many countries within our regions still face remarkably high food insecurity. They include Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Tajikistan, while many others, such as Kyrgyz Republic and Bangladesh, have to tackle moderately high food insecurity. The COVID-19 and the resulting heavy losses in employment and income will reverse much of the progress made in reducing hunger and malnutrition. It is holding us back from achieving the second Sustainable Development Goal target of zero hunger by 2030. Next slide, please. In closing, let me pose a few questions for all to think about and perhaps for the panel to address. First, as we know, vaccinations are key to getting through this COVID-19 pandemic and getting the recovery on track. Most people talk about building back better. I talk about building forward better. To start this process, how can government ensure immediate provision of healthcare and vaccinations to the most vulnerable? Second, COVID-19 may be the main challenge facing us, But it is certainly not the only challenge. Climate change, extreme weather events, storm, floods, drought, and environmental degradations must be dealt with urgently, as well as increasing inequality both within and across economies. So how do countries ensure the post-pandemic recovery is green, tackles climate change, and rising inequality? So inclusive also. Third, many economies will require continued financial support once the pandemic ends, whether for investment in infrastructure, energy, education, or health, and many others. We need to work together in partnership to ensure we support sustainable and inclusive growth, aside from our poverty reduction effort. So what is the scope of Islamic finance in filling in the financing gap required to kickstart the economic recovery? So with those questions, I want to thank you for your attentions, and I look forward to a vibrant and informative discussion. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to you, Brother
Thank
Arif.
you, Dr. Susantono. You've made my job more difficult, but also at the same time easier. More difficult in the sense that you've posed some very pertinent questions to the panel and to ourselves to look at, but easier in that you've actually set the stage quite nicely and pretty much set the scene for where we are at the moment. In terms of the vaccine rollouts, vaccine inequality, etc., that will be tackled in other sessions on the fringes of the annual meeting. The other two areas in how to build forward better, and perhaps the issue around collaboration, we will try and tackle that as we go forward. But maybe bringing both collaboration and how do we move forward together, this is actually a nice segue to highlight the ISDBI OPHI briefs that we've collaborated with OPHI on in terms of, you've also mentioned in previous discourses around data being the new oil. And this is one of the areas that we focused on here with the OPHI, is to look at bringing an evidence basis towards taking informed decisions. So with that, I would like to we have Sabina online and we have Sami here. So perhaps just to launch the ISDBI OPHI reports, and if the team could please play the video launching the two reports. I would like to thank the teams from the ISDBI and OPHI for their superb collaboration in making these briefs possible. Today, we will launch two briefs. There's another 3 on its way over the next few weeks. The briefs are all available on the ISDBI website. The link would be shared and will also be posted on the OPHI website as well. It is envisaged that the partnership between ISDBI and OPHI will help bring to the fore evidence bases to support informed decision-making in our member countries in the quest to fight multidimensional poverty. Dr. Susantono's set the scene quite nicely, and I'm not going to repeat the questions that he's posed to the panel, but just to say that, today what we have in the panel is we've brought around the tripartite, the three key critical players in terms of those that are necessary to help tackle this key challenge. We have with us academia and thought leaders, policymakers, and also development partners, so the MDBs, etc. And without much ado, let me introduce the panel that we have. So today we have with us Sabina Al-Kay, who is the director of OPHI. Sabina is also the Associate Professor of Development Studies in the Oxford Department of International Development at the University of Oxford. She's previously worked at the Global Equity Initiative at Harvard and the Human Security Commission, and also the World Bank's Poverty and Culture Learning and Research Initiative. Together with Professor James Foster, Sabina has developed the Al-Kay-Foster method for measuring multidimensional poverty, which has been applied to produce the MPI. So Sabina is pretty much the brain behind and the thought leader behind this MPI and the whole concept of multidimensional poverty. We also have with us today Mr. Nurkulov Ibrahimovic, who is the first Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction in the Republic of Uzbekistan. Prior to joining the Ministry of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction, Mr. Nurkulov was in the Central Bank of Uzbekistan in various roles, including becoming the first Deputy Chairman of the Central Bank. He has a rich experience in economic and human development and brings with him a wealth of private sector experience and expertise. We also have in the room with us Ilyas Dede from Mauritania, who is the Director of Demographic and Social Statistics at the National Statistical Office. He has also been the focal point for Sahel Women Empowerment and Demographic Dividend Project since 2015. Ilyas has great knowledge in demographics and human development. We also joining us today is Matilda Domovska, who is the Res Rep of the United Nations Development Program in Uzbekistan. Prior to this, she led the country office support team of the UNDP Istanbul Regional Hub for Europe and the CIS. Matilda brings with her a wide range of experience, having previously also worked in Moldova, Georgia, and Skopje. Last but not least, a good friend as well, Khamis Al-Ghaza, who is the Senior Advisor to the Director General of the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development, where he is in charge of developing poverty reduction programs, partnerships, and mobilizing resources. Prior to joining the ISFD, Khamis was the Chief Operating Officer of the ISEC, which is the Islamic Cooperation for the Insurance of Investments and Export Credits. This brief bios of the panelists does not do justice to anyone, but given time constraints, we'll keep it at that. Sabina, Dr. Susantono has highlighted several issues and challenges experienced in developing Asia as a result of COVID, and also highlighted issues around decreased education and food insecurity. Now, given the recent changes that he's mentioned and some of the changes that we've envisaged, is the index still relevant, or do we need to tweak the index? This is just, any thoughts on this one? And then how can the index, how can the work that we've done be used for policy coordination and building back better, building forward better, whatever terminology we want to use, coming back from COVID? If you could share also some of the findings of the work that we've done jointly, that would be superb. Sabina? I know it's a mouthful.
Thank you so much, Arif. And if possible, to have some slides. The question for Islamic finance is where to invest in order to have the biggest impact on poverty. And next slide. So what we are exploring is how to use data on multidimensional poverty to design policies, to target, and to allocate budget to most effectively. Across the 42 IDB member countries that are included, levels of MPI range from 0.1% to 90% of the population. 424 million people are poor. And so we can look at, in a sense, the diagnosis of poverty. And we can also learn from the trends over time, how and where poverty reduced fastest and where it might require more emphasis. Next slide. We can see the composition of poverty by each of the 10 indicators, because policies need to know how people are poor in order to know where investments will move the needle fastest. Next slide. We need to look within countries at children, at rural areas, at subnational regions to see which groups are most vulnerable. And the report that we have jointly produced does that. Next slide. And then we look at trends. Across the 34 countries with data, 29 have significant reductions in multidimensional poverty over the most recent pre-COVID period, led by Sierra Leone, Mauritania, and Guinea. So this slide has all of the countries from least poor to poorest and the speed of reduction, with the fastest reduction being at the bottom with Sierra Leone. Next slide. And the second briefing focuses on 15 of those countries, 10 of which we have trend data for that are in MENA. And in that region, Mauritania had the fastest reduction of poverty in that period. Next slide. But we also want to know what worked. How did poverty go down? And then we can learn how we might do similar things now. So we look at changes by each indicator, because any reduction of any deprivation of poor people will reduce poverty overall. Next slide. So let's just give a quick example from Mauritania. In 2015, over half the population were poor, with big differences between rural and urban areas. Children's poverty was 16 percentage points higher than adult. And across the regions, it varied from 7 to 75%. But in the previous 4 years, its reduction was the second fastest of the member countries included. And 11 of its 12 subnational regions reduced poverty, and all 10 indicators saw significant reductions. So we can learn from successes, even if they haven't yet achieved what we hope to in the next periods and after the pandemic. Next slide. The other question we have is whether the poorest are being left behind. But in this case, the poorest subnational region, Khod El Gharbi, had the fastest reduction of MPI. Next slide. And we do this for other countries. For example, in Gambia, we also see a pro-poor trend. Next slide. And the briefings also look at whether monetary and multidimensional poverty move together or not, whether their levels are similar or not. And here we see that the blue reduction of multidimensional poverty and the red of monetary in the same time periods are different. So we need both so that finance knows where to invest and how to move on both kinds of poverty. Next slide. So the MPI is not an academic tool. It's a tool which is meant to inform policies. And during the COVID pandemic, we've tried to use data from before the pandemic to sensitize to how people are poor, where they are poor, and how the different social protection and job policies can and have responded and where the gaps might be. Next slide. I know you can't see these details, but they collect some information. I'd like to end just by presenting the fastest reduction, which was Sierra Leone. This was the fastest reduction across the 42 member countries, but it was also across 70 countries and 5 billion people. And what's interesting about Sierra Leone is that its reduction occurred 2013 to 17, during the years when the pandemic raged. And that gives us hope that even in this very difficult period, with a good investment of finance based on the oil of data, and with all of the policy energies that Pak Bang shared, that we can also build forward better. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you, Sabina, for that quick overview and sharing some of your thoughts. And very interesting on Sierra Leone, the fact that it's actually reduced poverty the fastest despite the Ebola pandemic. Any parallels that you think we can draw from that on the current one?
In the case of Sierra Leone, the role of external actors collaborating with national actors was paramount. The very dedicated investments in non-monetary aspects of poverty in a coordinated way and in a very short time period was essential because it needed to contain the pandemic, to build in hand washing, to build in education systems and health systems. And those parallels about an urgency, the need for international and national actors to collaborate, and the priority of non-monetary sectors as well as the economic ones, I think are parallels in this period.
Thank you for that, Sabina. Bang, as you can see, your third question already to some extent being answered by Sabina. I think let's switch from the higher level down to the country level and look specifically in terms of what some of the countries are doing and what's happening on the ground. And it's an absolute pleasure to call on our host country, Mr. Nurkulov, if you could share with us some of your thoughts. Uzbekistan's made significant strides in the fight on income poverty since 2003. We've seen really good progress made in the last 2 decades. In fact, Uzbekistan, one of the few countries that managed to avoid going into recession during the pandemic. Now, Sabina's highlighted in her intervention the importance of the MPI in terms of targeting interventions in member countries and targeting resources, targeting policy to try and tackle the scourge of poverty. Any thoughts from the Uzbekistan side in terms of adopting this measure going forward? And then if you could share with us some of the work done and measures taken to reduce poverty in Uzbekistan so that other member countries can also learn from this experience. Mr. Nurkulov, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Dear guests, first of all, let me express our gratitude on behalf of Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Kuchkarov, for the organizers of this event, especially Islamic Development Bank and Institute. Today's event bears a very important role in knowledge sharing and also laying a good ground for future partnership, especially after during the COVID and post-COVID period. It's very important because we are actually facing a new challenge, and it's very important to coordinate our actions. Before moving to answer the questions that you asked, let me quickly and briefly inform you what we did during the COVID period and what has allowed us to avoid some serious negative outcomes of the pandemic or its impact. First of all, I want to note about the macroeconomic measures that were taken, in the country. These are the fiscal measures. The first thing that we did is it was very quick action to set up the anti-crisis fund that allowed us to take very quick measures, especially to support healthcare system and to support very fragile sectors of the economy. So that fiscal measures also included to provide some incentives and tax exemptions for services and other sectors of the economy who suffered during the pandemic period. And it's very important because these are these sectors were also sectors which employed substantial quantity of the people in the economy. The next one is that monetary policy was also flexible in the context of cutting the interest rate accordingly with the inflation rate, and also providing the tax holidays to the companies or firms that suffered during the pandemic. And these measures, along with other quick measures, allowed us to avoid the serious outcomes, as I mentioned. So, the characteristics of that difficult economic situation that all world countries they faced, and we also faced, wasn't relevant or wasn't only due to economic factors. It is dependent on other measures, such as how the medical system or healthcare system is ready, what sort of infrastructure you have to cope with the difficult situation, and what is the structure of the labor market, and what is the level of the human capital. Are they, substantial? Does the substantial part of the employed people in the shadow sector of the economy, and et cetera, these factors, they underlie, the success of the measures that you take. But having the appropriate fiscal and monetary buffers, we were able to shorten the restrictions and tight quarantine measures. So at the beginning, there was a tight condition, and so but in this short period, the coordinated measures of the government, in the form of building and increasing the capacity of the healthcare system, building the new hospitals, importing the laboratories, test system, medicals, etc., that allowed us to soften and ease the quarantine measures and revive the economic activity, and also be able to stand ready for the next waves of this pandemic. But I have to note here that having a right knowledge, it was very difficult because it's a totally new condition, so the new challenge, and having involved in the process not only all the government agencies, but also international partners, development agencies, was also a key factor here. And I think so a well-coordinated action plays a key measure, because that partnership doesn't allow only the financial support or technical assistance. Also, it allows us to get a better knowledge, in the rapidly changing environment. Moving to the question, how pandemic impacted the living conditions and well-being of the people. I have to note that at the beginning of 2020, there was a huge and important step in the context of fighting against the poverty. It was in the history of the country first time recognized that poverty will be one of the major actions and major topics at the government's government policy agenda. So at the beginning of 2020, His Excellency Mr. Mirziyoyev, President of the country, announced that that poverty reduction will be a key policy measure. And after that, we started to move in different directions. The first thing was to set up the institutional base for that, and the new ministry, the Ministry of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction, was set up. But also at the same time, we started to work on developing the strategy and program measures. And this actually coincided with the beginning of the COVID or pandemic period, and it was a kind of a double challenge for us. But nevertheless, we didn't have a right kind of measurement or methodological approach at the table, because it was a new topic. Before that, the issue of poverty wasn't officially recognized. We didn't use the word poverty. We used I will be open. We used to use the word like low-income families, etc., but not poverty. So poverty became like recognized. It was officially told that that will be the major issue for us to fight. And in that context, we started to work with different IFIs and development agencies together. And we started to develop a methodological base, and in relatively short period, we were able to introduce a new poverty line measurement. So that wasn't done in the past. So it was a kind of also a historic step, because everyone was asking what is the approach, what is the criteria to define the right target people in the country. So target group in the context of determining the poor group of the people, and there were different approaches, but together with World Bank and other IFIs and especially UN agencies, we did some research, we did some survey, and we developed a kind of methodology based on minimum consumption expenditures that allows us to identify a group of people to work with at the first stage. That we say that will allow us to determine the target group of the people, that will allow us to estimate the level of the poverty, and that will allow us to take appropriate policy measures and also practical measures to develop a right policy towards social assistance and social protection policies. And that will be, now we are working on integrating this measurement and this criteria with new system, single social registry. And so as a result of these measures, we revised the minimum social payments, such as social social benefits and minimum pensions. So they will be starting from 1st of September, they will not be less than initially or preliminary estimated level of minimum consumption expenditures. And one more thing that I want to say on the practical side, during the pandemic period, even so we didn't have this kind of methodology or mechanism or tools to define, to determine the right group of the target group of the people, but we didn't stay like quiet. So probably some of you heard about Temir Daftar or Iron Book. This is the term was coined by the initiative head of the state. That's to determine especially the target group of the families who suffered during the pandemic. These are the people especially who temporarily lost their job and due to temporary closing of the industry, service sector, etc., and also socially vulnerable people. So all the efforts during the pandemic were concentrated on helping this group of the people. And slowly from this, we are moving to more systemic, more like fundamental, steps, as I mentioned. And so the other measures that we did during the pandemic is we doubled the number of the families who are receiving the social benefits. And also during the pandemic, we introduced several instruments that would allow to create for families to increase their income base. And so a few examples of them could be, in the context of today's discussion, access to finance. So it's a family entrepreneurship program, and that program basically was introduced in 2017, but at the beginning, that program was just a kind of microfinance system. But later on, slowly, as the time went on, we started to learn and started to discuss how to make it efficient, and new measures along with this program, they started to come on, such as educating and training the households to business skills and some other skills that they would be able to use this microfinance or microloans efficiently in the future, such as finding the markets, setting up the cooperatives, etc., etc. And if we are going to speak about the way forward, what we are going to do in the future, so now we are having, as I mentioned, news going to have in place in new systems such as single social registry and new criteria to determine the target group of the people. And this line, this poverty line, allows us to work and to design a specific instruments who are under the line and who are just above the line, just to make sure that they will not go down below the poverty line. And so too many things on the table, but as we are working together with international experts and see from our experience, we are becoming more and more confident that, especially Mr. Santano also in his presentation, in the other presentations, we saw that there is some correlation between the economic growth level and income level. So we understand that without having a sustainable high growth level, it will be very difficult to reduce the poverty level or to improve the well-being of the people. But this growth has to be in an inclusive way, and so the key factor here will be to invest in human capital. Human capital in a way with the aim to increase the demographic dividend, because that most of the richest countries or advanced economies today, they are facing a huge challenge and problem with aging population. But on the other side, Uzbekistan has a good kind of opportunity if we design right policy and right investments to use this opportunity or to increase or to develop the human capital.
Mr. Nurkulov, I'm going to interject here quickly and just ask you if you could wrap it up. But I think you've made a couple of very salient and key points in that collaboration, coordination, better targeting, better support from development partners is key, and this has been important in your fight against poverty, and really a sterling effort from the country in terms of the new measures, etc., that it's done to keep the economic engine running, saving lives and livelihoods. I just want to switch over to Ilyas quickly in terms of Mauritania. Ilyas, it's been already highlighted by Sabina as being one of the sort of poster boys or poster kids for the MPI. Any thoughts, Ilyas? Any specific projects and programs that you want to share with us on this one? Ilyas will Ilyas will probably be speaking in Arabic. So for those that want to follow in English, please remember the translation at the bottom. Fadal, Ilyas. إلياس
سوف أقدم العرض باللغة الفرنسية. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على
اوكي
النبي
تفضل
الكريم.
الفرنسية ما في مشكلة.
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour présenter l'expérience de mon pays.
Elias, your mic is very soft. You need to come closer to the mic.
Pour lutter contre les effets de la pandémie de Covid.
Elias, a bit closer to the mic, please. Yes. Elias, if you can come closer to the mic.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez maintenant? Ok, j'ai dit c'est un plaisir pour moi d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour présenter l'expérience de mon pays dans la lutte contre la pauvreté et les actions et interventions prises pour lutter contre les effets de la pandémie de Covid. Mon intervention déroulera autour de 5 points. Le premier point, c'est l'aperçu sur l'historique de la collecte des données et la pauvreté. Le deuxième point, c'est le projet de calcul de l'indice de la pauvreté multidimensionnelle. Troisième point, c'est les efforts. Troisième point, c'est les efforts contre la pauvreté en Mauritanie. Quatrième point, c'est la nature des effets économiques de la pandémie de Covid et les actions prises par le gouvernement. Le cinquième point sera les dernières statistiques sur l'impact de Covid sur les conditions de vie des ménages. Donc, les pays adhérés aux enquêtes QUIP, questionnaire unifié sur les indicateurs de base pour le bien-être depuis les années 80, pour fournir aux décideurs nationaux des résultats fiables et les conditions de vie des ménages. Série des enquêtes ont été réalisées depuis 1988 par l'Agence nationale de la statistique et de l'analyse démographique, dont la dernière a été en 2019-2020, juste avant la pandémie de Covid. Cette enquête appelle l'enquête permanente sur les conditions de vie des ménages, qui est régulière chaque 4 ans, vise globalement à renseigner et suivre les principaux changements observés sur les conditions de vie des ménages et particulièrement les suivis de la pauvreté. Jusqu'à 2019-2020, on a fait 8 enquêtes depuis 1988. Les derniers résultats ont montré que les milieux ruraux concentrent plus de 3 quarts, 75,3% des pauvres. Aussi, la contribution du milieu rural à la profondeur et sévérité de la pauvreté est d'environ 80%. Ces résultats indiquent que la pauvreté, un milieu rural, n'est pas seulement plus étendue en termes de nombre de pauvres,
Elias, sorry to intervene on your presentation, but Elias, can we focus specifically on the... Elias, can we focus on the projects that the Mauritanian government has done to tackle the poverty as opposed to going into the numbers? So just some of the key lessons, yes.
Ok, il n'y a pas de problème. Donc, je voulais dire brièvement que nous sommes en train de monter un projet avec la OFI pour faire un indicateur MPI à partir des dernières données sur les conditions de vie des ménages. Donc, plusieurs efforts ont été déployés par le gouvernement mauritanien depuis plusieurs années en faveur de la lutte contre la pauvreté. Le premier cadre stratégique de lutte contre la pauvreté a été élaboré en 2001, fruit d'un très long processus participatif. Celui-ci a arrêté des objectifs à long terme assez ambitieux de la pauvreté et d'amélioration des conditions de vie de la population. Ce programme stratégique a été remplacé en 2016 par une nouvelle stratégie plus ambitieuse appelée la stratégie de croissance accélérée et de la prospérité partagée, SCAP, dont le deuxième plan d'action quinquennal vient d'être adopté en début de cette année 2021 jusqu'au 2025. Pour concentrer les actions et travail de lutte contre la pauvreté en Mauritanie, le gouvernement a créé une agence nationale de lutte contre la pauvreté sous la tutelle de la présidence de la République. 6 programmes, cette agence a monté 6 programmes, ont été créés au sein de cette délégation. Chaque programme est concerné par une thématique spécifique liée à la lutte contre la pauvreté et l'exclusion de toutes ses formes. Donc, premier programme, ça appelé Sheila.
Ilyas, I'm going to have to stop you there. What we're going to do, Ilyas,
facilitation de l'accès des populations pauvres et vulnérables aux services sociaux de base.
Ilyas, I'm going to have to interject. So Ilyas, maybe just to
التعليم والتكوين والصحة والتغذية المياه comme l'éducation, formation, la santé, nutrition, l'eau et assainissement et l'énergie. Donc, deuxième programme, c'est un programme appelé El Baraka qui est concentré par la promotion de l'inclusion économique des populations pauvres et vulnérables.
Okay, Ilyas, I'm going to ask you to stop here. I think very, very importantly, what we've highlighted, or So Ilyas, in terms of what you've highlighted, very important in terms of getting accurate information, accurate data, and also key targeted programs and interventions. With that, I want to switch across to Matilda. Unfortunately, we are running over time. So Matilda, if you can keep it very concise, and perhaps just focus, Matilda, in terms of financing of poverty reduction. So we'll move away from the measurement and the collaboration, etc., and start looking at the issue of financing, etc. And if you could talk through at the country level any innovative financing mechanisms, etc., that you may want to share.
Thank you. First of all, of course, assalamu alaikum, hurmatli Anjuman istiroqchileri. I speak from Tashkent, so I have to start with the most important message for Uzbekistan these days, and that's Mustaqlik Bayrami Mubarak Bolsun. It's a great question that you raised because I think that Uzbekistan has a lot to say about that. It has a good examples to provide. Mr. Nurkulov covered all of my points that I wanted previously to speak about the historic importance of putting the poverty reduction as a policy priority for the country at a very, very difficult time when the COVID arrived, and when policies, urgent ones, COVID response had to be very well synchronized with a longer term objective of the reforms, massive reforms that is undertaken, and including the poverty reduction strategy. And that has been very successfully made. And increased ambition of measuring the poverty, way of defining the poverty, interest as we see for introducing a multi-dimensional poverty measurement as well in the country, and many other things. But let me go to the question. Yes, it was very clear to the government when we started working with them together with the World Bank in devising the poverty reduction strategy that the document has to be, as any other strategy, has to be well budgeted and well financed behind. And of course, particularly in the COVID-related context, that became even more difficult. The big sources, biggest portion of the sources would come definitely from the public resources, but that these are limited. So therefore, the question of how to mobilize public, private resources, national and international, became extremely important. So we are very proud that we have been working very closely with the government on issuing the first for Uzbekistan and among the first in this region SDG bonds, SDG bonds that has started being traded in the London Stock Exchange very successfully in July this year. That will be the proceeds of which will be directed for 7 sustainable development in 7 areas like education, water management, health, and green transportation, pollution, and green energy, and so on. Basically, to accelerate the progress in ending the poverty, protecting the environment, and ensuring a prosperity for all in the future. The other instrument that, together with the ISDB, we are working on supporting the government now is to establish the enabling environment for a green Sukuk Islamic bond to pave the way for that, so that Uzbekistan issues this important instrument as well. So those instruments we see bringing kind of a bridging not only the financing gap that we have for the poverty and sustainable development in general, but also to increase the transparency, efficiency, and accountability of the allocation of the proceeds of these instruments. This is just the first step and one of the many examples that we from Uzbekistan can bring. Let me stop here in the interest of time.
Thanks, Matilda. Appreciate the very concise intervention. And Khamis, this brings you, it's right up your alley. Good segue into what are we doing on the ISFD side in terms of tackling this huge challenge of poverty. And so if you could shed a bit of light on the role of Islamic finance in poverty reduction and some of the work of the ISFD. And I'm going to plead to keep it very, very tight and concise, Khamis. I know you could speak on this for hours.
Sure. Thank you, Arif, and thanks for IRTI for arranging this important event and for inviting the Islamic Solidarity Fund to be part of this important workshop. As many of you would know, that the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development is the poverty alleviation arm of the Islamic Development Bank Group. And we have been established originally as a Waqf fund. So that's a very important Islamic finance concept that we have used from the beginning to show the tadamun or the solidarity between member countries. So we are using a Waqf as one of the most popular Islamic modes of finance, since the beginning of history of Islam, to support projects, programs to reduce poverty in our member countries. Now, the poverty, how we look at poverty in our member countries, of course, it's we look at it as a multi-dimensional poverty aspect, and we look at a number of sectors as a very crucial to develop, especially on the education sector, the health sector, and the community development sector. So this is part of our new strategy 2030 to reduce poverty. So, for example, in the education sector, knowing that education is very important to alleviate poverty in our member countries, we have developed, for example, the out-of-school children program, which we believe that enrolling children of 28 million of children in our member countries as a strategic target for us. And as mentioned by Dr. Bank, I mean, there are the quality of education and the remote learning is very important to introduce and to alleviate poverty. Number two, the health sector, we have been very active in reaching out our poor population in our member countries. According to our projects that have been implemented, around 70 million or more than 70 million have benefited from our programs. And this is linked to a number of issues that our member countries are suffering, like the blindness or avoidable blindness, the obstetric fistula, the strengthening of national laboratories in the COVID crisis, and many other programs in the health sector that would support our member countries in fighting COVID effects. Also, very importantly, the community development sector, which we have put in the center of our strategy 2030, is using and would like to develop our communities in our member countries through using developers like the NGOs and CSOs. And here I really appreciated and the decision of the IRTI to select a crowdfunding platform like Seed Out to be awarded with during this side event, because we believe that NGOs, CSOs are a key player and have to play an important role in the ground to develop their communities, to help reducing the poverty, because they know better. And this is what we are trying to do through, for example, a Tadaman NGO empowerment program, which we have launched in 2020, Tadaman Accelerator, this is for COVID, where we give capacity building and access to finance to NGOs to be able to deliver on the ground and to implement projects that would have, even if these projects are very small, but it will have a direct effect and an immediate effect on their community and directly on the poor. Finally, let me touch base on the economic empowerment sector, where recently ISFD has adopted a new approach with the development waqf to really support economies of our member countries, to support those vulnerable enterprises that are suffering also from the impact of the COVID, to use the economic empowerment approach to fight also against poverty and reduce poverty in our member countries, especially by focusing on women and youth. Now, economic empowerment, as most of you knows, I mean, it's an approach that we invest directly with the poor, and this is first time in history of ISFD where our capital is a waqf capital. We are using now our capital to invest with the poor instead of using the investment return of the waqf capital. I mean, these are a few examples and projects programs that we are supporting in our member countries, and we are trying to be as innovative as possible in using Islamic finance modes to really mobilize resources. As you know, the waqf is waqf funds, country waqf funds are one of the new products of ISFD. The cash waqf sukuk is also in the list.
Khamis, I'm gonna stop you there, because I know you can go on this one for a long time. Sure. But I think what's come through the entire session, and we are running out of time on the first panel, and just to be fair to Yahya and the next panel, is innovation has been critical. We've seen this from the start of the day with the impact that Seed Out and Launch could have had. And the award that they've received. So innovation important. Sabina and many of the other speakers today have highlighted the critical nature of having better data for better measurement, for better targeting, and ultimately better impact. Collaboration, coordination, working together for the better good, to build forward better using Bambang's terminology. I think these are critical issues. There's many questions that were raised, but we've run out of time for this session, and I want to apologize to Yahya and the second panel for going beyond our time. I'll give you a couple of extra minutes at the end, and apologies to the delegates who are here today as well. So let's move on to the third session, and And let me hand over the floor to Yahya Rahman, who is the global lead on Islamic finance. Yahya, over to you.
Thank you, Arif. And once again, welcome everyone to the last and final session of this Global Islamic Finance Forum. I would just like to, to just kind of lay down that, we have about 45 minutes. So we will try
one of the translators has their mic on.
Okay, I think there's some technical glitch, so okay. So we will try to keep the session for 45 minutes as follows. We'll start with a keynote speech, which is going to be followed by the virtual launch of the reference guide, Islamic Finance for Infrastructure PPP projects, which is something that was referred to by His Excellency the President as well. And then this will be followed by a panel discussion. So our keynote speaker today is Mr. Imad Fahouri. Imad is the Global Director of the Infrastructure Finance, PPP and Guarantees Group at the World Bank. He was previously a Senior Advisor for Private Sector Solutions at the IFC. And before joining the World Bank Group, he also served in successive Jordanian governments as the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation, the Minister of Public Sector Development, and the Minister of State for Mega Projects. He has served as a senator in the Jordanian Parliament and as the Chief of Staff and Director of Office of His Majesty King Abdullah II. So, and Imad has been instrumental in terms of his support and leadership for the collaboration between the World Bank and the ISDB and in the development of the reference guide. So without further ado, let me hand over to Imad. Imad, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Many thanks for the introduction, Yahya. And on behalf of the World Bank Group, I'd like to thank the Islamic Development Bank Group for hosting us alongside your annual meetings and the Islamic Development Bank Institute for organizing this global forum on Islamic finance. I'm also thrilled to use this opportunity to launch the joint report, the Reference Guide on Islamic Finance for Infrastructure PPPs, developed by our two organizations. Efforts to boost Islamic finance for sustainable development are more critical now than ever. Many years from now, we will remember 2020 to 21, and likely longer, unfortunately, as the years the world faced a global pandemic of stunning disruptive proportion. The impact of COVID-19 on human health and well-being has been devastating, presenting serious challenges to health systems and calling for a rapid response to contain the virus and protect vulnerable populations. The pandemic has put in stark relief the weaknesses of global coordination, national health systems, and social and hard infrastructure more generally. It is a reminder of our own fragility and that major risks are often difficult to foresee or control. Yet, preparedness and resilience are silver linings to this crisis. Systems we put in place now can respond to future global shocks, reduce their impacts, or even ward them off, saving people, property, and the planet. Good infrastructure systems in particular build resilient societies. They include services such as communications, healthcare, transportation, energy, and water and sanitation that we actually need in crisis. Let us take a step back to 2015, when world leaders demonstrated unprecedented global collaboration and optimism, agreeing on a transformative global agenda for sustainable development. The 2030 Development Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals reflect the collective ambition to end poverty in all its forms, preserve our planet for future generations, and leave no one behind. This ambition is critical for the Muslim world. In 2012, the 57 members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, were home to 1/3 of the global population now living in extreme poverty. Putting it simply, we cannot end extreme poverty if OIC countries do not. Attaining the SDGs requires significant investment. In 21 Muslim countries, fewer than half of the people have access to sanitation. Only a handful of Muslim countries can provide older people with access to safe water resources. We all know that infrastructure comes with a high price tag. We must engage all stakeholders and potential sources of finance for its development. This was underlined by the 27 Hamburg Principles, where the G20 and multilateral development banks emphasized the private sector's potential for providing solutions to a growing number of development issues, including the need for more sustainable infrastructure. Let me remind us of the gap. Our analytical work as a World Bank suggests that with the right policies, smart infrastructure investments of an average of 4.5% of GDP will enable low and middle income countries to achieve the infrastructure-related SDGs and stay on track to limit climate change to under 2 degrees. And that range actually is about 2 to 8%, depending on where the country sits. In addition to the importance of maintaining infra investment as a necessary condition for success, for it generates substantial savings, reducing the total life cycle cost by more than 50%. This roughly translates to an average of $1 trillion a year in a gap, or looking at it from the perspective of achieving the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, this will require 50 trillion to achieve the net zero emissions by 2050. So mobilizing private participation in infrastructure and private capital is crucial, which requires the scaling of PPPs and the scaling of the crowding of commercial and institutional finance. What does this mean exactly? This means that all stakeholders, and MDBs in particular, need to act strategically and cohesively to mobilize novel resources of financing, knowledge, and innovation. As MDBs, our success in achieving this depends largely on helping governments create enabling environments that attract the private sector. While there is no simple recipe, certain elements from the backbone of how we can assist governments in delivering infrastructure services. These include enhancing domestic resource mobilization and financial markets, better public spending efficiency, improving investment climates and the private participation in infrastructure enabling environment, promoting financing practices for that sustainability, improving governance, reforming sector regulatory frameworks, and strengthening bankable project pipelines based on robust public investment planning to accommodate expanded financial resources. Not only does this help countries achieve more and better results, it supports inclusive, sustainable growth. This is a huge ground to cover, which is why effective partnership between governments, the private sector, and MDBs is essential. The need to ensure that our recovery and infrastructure services is climate smart makes this partnership even more pressing. We need all hands on deck. Islamic finance has a key role to play in helping developing countries, both Muslim and non-Muslim, achieve the SDGs. It can improve the stability of the financial sector with features such as its profit and loss sharing arrangements and requirements for a link with the real economy through the creation of physical assets. The asset-backed, ring-fenced, and project-specific nature of Islamic finance structures and their emphasis on sharing risks makes them a natural fit for infrastructure public-private partnerships. Islamic finance also supports efforts to meet the SDGs through the promotion of financial inclusion. And Islamic finance has a real opportunity to do more. Globally, the Islamic finance industry surpassed the $2 trillion mark in assets and continues to grow, calling the attention of financial players interested in understanding Islamic finance features and mechanisms. In that context, the World Bank Group and the Islamic Development Bank Group, with funding from the Public-Private Infrastructure Advisory Facility, or PIAF, developed a report on mobilizing Islamic finance for infrastructure PPPs in 2017. That report aimed to enhance the understanding of the building blocks of Islamic finance as they relate to financing infrastructure PPPs, while also examining how Islamic finance fits within the larger infrastructure PPP context. During the report's consultations, the team saw a need for more capacity to scale up the use of Islamic finance and for standardized documentation across sectors and asset classes. In response, I am pleased to announce that our two organizations have again come together with additional funding from PF to launch a reference guide that delves deeper on the how of Islamic finance and infrastructure PPPs, which we will believe has been a major impediment to its deployment. The reference guide helps operationalize the use of Islamic finance for infrastructure PPPs through case studies and legal templates. It is a practical tool to help investors and PPP units worldwide build more capacity to enter Sharia-compliant infrastructure PPPs and share in the vast potential Islamic finance has to offer. During this pivotal moment, MDBs play a bridge-building role, being well-placed to demonstrate to developing countries the value of the private sector and also improving the risk-return profile of individual investments through an array of instruments, improving project viability, building markets, and attracting commercial capital at a lower cost. To that end, we work to build back better towards a green, resilient, and inclusive recovery. We must continue to promote Islamic finance for infrastructure development. MDBs can help demonstrate the value of Islamic finance and eventually scale its use, reassuring client countries and commercial banks that it is a viable and market-tested while reducing transaction costs via support for standardization. As we move on to the panel discussion, I look forward to the discussion. What comes next? What can we do better? Each stakeholder from the private sector, public sector, to the development finance institutions brings diverse perspectives and objectives. But I know we have one common goal: to maximize the potential of Islamic finance to help countries build back better and build forward better in the pandemic's wake. Thank you all once again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Imad. I think indeed very pertinent points that you made about the impact of COVID that has had now. And again, the impact that is going to be felt for many years to come. And also, you know, the indelible mark it has left on the global economy and exposing the fragility and the need for resilience. And most importantly, you know, the need for cooperation between the MDBs and the public and the private sector. And I'm glad to hear, you know, this, expression of support and you know, a kind of acknowledgement of the potential, the enormous potential of Islamic finance. And I'm sure our panelists will be reflecting on some of the questions that you've posed at the end. I think you've already introduced, you know, the guide briefly. So I think this is a good segue into for us to now launch the video for launching the reference guide, Islamic Finance for Infrastructure PPP Projects. Please play the video now. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please note that the reference guide along with its full appendices is accessible on both the World Bank and the ISDB websites. So I really encourage you to visit our sites and benefit from this excellent tool. We would now like to move on to the panel discussion. I'm really pleased that we have a very well-rounded and balanced panel with representation from the World Bank and the Islamic Development Bank, and also from the public and private sectors. Our panelists today include Ms. Fatuma Toure Ibrahima. Fatuma is the practice manager of the PPP group for the World Bank's Infrastructure, Finance, PPP, and Guarantees Department. She's previously served as the operations advisor of the Infrastructure and Urban Development Hub in Singapore, and has worked in several sectors, including finance and energy. And she's also worked as the senior financial specialist and team leader for Africa region and the regional representative for PPP infrastructure facility. My second panelist is Hassan Idris. Hassan is a senior legal counsel with the Islamic Corporation for the Insurance of Investment and Export Credit. Hassan has extensive experience in infrastructure finance, credit and political risk insurance, corporate law, Islamic finance, and PPP. He's been involved in a lot of PPP and project finance transactions in MENA, Asia, and the Africa regions across different sectors. Our public sector representative and panelist is Nader Nurtinov, who is the Deputy Director of the PPP Development Agency of Uzbekistan. Nader has previously also served as the Deputy Director in the State-Owned Enterprises, Transformation, and Public Investments Departments. He's a board member of the JSCB Asia Alliance Bank and has worked in the past in the UK on numerous PPP projects with Deloitte, Bouygues, and Infrared. Lastly, we have a representative from the private sector, Mr. Sohail Kashif, who is the Chief Financial Officer of Foundation Wind Energy Limited, Pakistan. Sohail is also an associated member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan, and he has extensive experience working across different entities, especially in the power sector. He is currently the joint CFO of 2 wind power projects under Fauji Foundation, which is one of the largest business conglomerates in Pakistan. And as you may have noticed, his project is one of the ones which we have also included in as a case study in the reference guide, because it was jointly funded by the IDB and guaranteed by the Asian Development Bank. So with this brief introduction to the panelists, let me welcome everyone again. In the interest of time, I would request all the panelists to keep their interventions brief and concise. Let me start with Fatuma. Fatuma, as we've been hearing time and again during the session and in the keynote speeches as well, the world is still grappling with the effects of COVID-19, and this has had a profound effect in terms of infrastructure services. So now, as we're moving away from responding to the crisis and more into sort of focusing on the recovery, what role do you see for public-private partnerships, and how can institutions like the World Bank actually facilitate this?
Thank you very much, Brother Yahya. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Let me start really by thanking the Islamic Development Bank for inviting me for such an important event and be part of this distinguished panel. I'm pleased to be with the Islamic Development Bank, but also countries that we work very closely with. Indeed, we heard earlier the MPI and poverty numbers, the impact of COVID-19 on human development. I very much like the conversation earlier about how the Islamic Development Bank and other institutions can help address it. The COVID-19 pandemic has also significantly impacted infrastructure development and the global economy. And it goes without saying that COVID-19 is also affecting infrastructure, both for projects in place and those planning down the line. So on the impact, COVID-19 has also impacted both public and private financing. On the public side, we saw that the crisis has made governments more fiscally constrained than ever to invest, and they prioritize pandemic response and safety nets. On the private side, private sector investment in developing countries
infrastructure project dropped by half this year. So this is really a critical number that we keep in mind as we think about the roles of the public and private sectors in infrastructure. So the combination of public and private retreats compromises COVID recovery and the ability to build better once the pandemic is under control. So the pandemic has caused concern about credit quality, borrowers' liquidity, and counterparties' financial robustness. We have also observed that the greatest impact on infrastructure finance by the private sector has been where there has been really demand risk and ports and toll roads. This has important consequences as we seek to rearrange with the role of private sector, both developers and financiers, as we will have to develop solutions that partly isolate such demand risk. This implies creating innovative solutions such as guarantees where the World Bank backstops guarantee obligations on the PPPs, for example. With this impact, the question is, what do we need to do? In this scenario, we focus on smarter solutions. We also need to better infrastructure governance. We need to mobilize local pools of private, as we heard earlier. We make this happen. To make this happen, we need legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks, clear environmental and social to get the infrastructure right. So PPPs are one alternative for developing infrastructure assets when full private sector provision is not sufficient, but that involves a more intense participation by the private. By considering full life cycle perspective of an infrastructure asset, PPPs aim to better align the incentives of the public and the private sector by allocating risks, duties, and responsibilities to the party that is better suited to manage them. As mentioned, recognizing the importance of infrastructure for reestablishing economic livelihoods, a variety of national governments seek the revitalization of infrastructure as a priority. We know from previous experience in other crises that many governments must use infrastructure spending to stimulate their economies, recognizing the importance of revitalizing infrastructure as a priority. So the World Bank's intention is to proactively support countries as they put in place recovery strategies to prevent, mitigate, and also backstop distressed PPP projects. This is part of our integrated approach to help mobilize private sector financing and also expertise for infrastructure development in general, to get more resources to countries for this purpose affordably in a way that provides value for money. So our role as a multilateral development bank is very clear. We are here to help countries optimize private sector infrastructure solutions that are sustainable and resilient, while also informed by best practice, good governance, transparency, and fiscal sustainability. Once the enabling environment are in place, we work with countries to ensure that private sector solutions they consider are properly structured and prepared to ensure economic efficiency, commercial viability, fiscal sustainability, transparency also in competing bidding, and allocation of risk to the party most capable of handling them. We also focus on providing value for money, meeting environmental, social, and government criteria, factoring, of course, climate resilience and gender aspect. We help our client countries ensure that their infrastructure investment, both public and private means, support low carbon pathways and strengthen resilience to climate change and other kinds of shock, like the COVID-19 pandemic. Clearly, we will not do this alone. We will collaborate with institutions like yours and partner with countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatuma. I think you gave a good and comprehensive overview of both the World Bank strategy and how, a way forward in terms of not just, directly in terms of investment, but providing the guarantees and the support, and to mitigate some of the risks and concerns that the private sector has, when it comes to infrastructure projects and particularly in the wake of COVID-19 and the impact that has had on, demand and on that side of things. So we at the IDB have also had our own strategy, and again, I think the goals are fairly similar. And at this point, I think it would be good to ask Brother Hassan to chime in. The IDB has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic with its own 3R strategy, respond, restore, and restart. And I think now we're looking more towards the restore and restart strategy. So now the idea is how we can expedite this economic recovery and also focus on elements such as, green recovery and sustainability, and how, we can add the element of Islamic finance and the ethical principles of Islamic finance, and then align them with the broad SDGs. So one, I would like to ask you, and I'm in the interest of time, I'm just going to combine my two questions, which I had two things in mind. So one is how you can perhaps, show us and explain to us how the IDB has been attempting to do this with a focus on the private sector. And secondly, perhaps you can also, one of the concerns which Imad also raised during his speech is that, the idea of, standardization and transaction costs and all of that. And perhaps you can sort of in the second part of your answer also focus on how the PPP guide and the templates that, we have created will help allay some of those costs and some of those fears. I know because you were instrumental in developing the legal templates in the PPP guide. So perhaps first on IDB's response, and then the second on a little reflection on the PPP guide.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's quite loaded, but I'll do my best to provide a very condensed and clinical response. I think in response to the pandemic, the IDB board approved the strategic preparedness and response package. Now the package is about 2.3 billion worth of intervention, which has 3 tracks, as you rightly mentioned, the 3 R's: respond, restore, and restart. Now we have passed the stage of respond, which is mainly the short-term measures that we did to address the immediate medical and other critical supply needs of our member countries during the early stages of the pandemic and the resulting lockdown. Now we're currently at the restore stage. The restore track basically consists of medium-term actions to overcome the big effects of the pandemic, with focus on strengthening the private sector. Now, this would do with the support to trade finance and SME operations. Now, to that extent, about 3 facilities were actually set up by the Islamic Development Bank. First being the Islamic Development Bank COVID Guarantee Facility. This is basically hosted by IDB and ISEC, the insurance arm of the IDB group. Now, the idea here is to mainly mobilize private funding for mid-term interventions to basically cushion the effects of the pandemic. This, of course, is informed by the heightened risk perception of member countries by financiers at the time, so the need for having guarantees and political and credit risk insurance. Now, the second facility for this, of course, is the trade finance facility, which was hosted by IDB and ICFC. ICFC is the trade finance arm of the IDB group. Now, that we know already that trade and critical supply chain disruptions have actually happened as a result of COVID transactions. So they need to restore that critical line for member countries to be very apparent. And that's actually our intervention through the trade finance facility, which really helps in that regard. And of course, the third facility under the restore track happens to be the SME financing facility, which is also hosted by IDB and ICD. Now, we all know that MSMEs are actually a critical economic nerve of our member countries, and the need to revive them and get support them was at the top of our agenda at the time. So, and still is, as we basically navigate through the effects of the COVID with our member countries. Now, I think the important part where I believe this conference also takes a lot of credit for is the restart part. The restart component basically is a long-term planning for us here, because looking at the setback caused by COVID, economies need to restart. Now, this restart track has a long-term outlook and actions to sort of build preparedness for the future, support revival of industries, kickstart economies, and also catalyze public and private investments. Now, you would understand that this is the infrastructure-heavy component of the package, the strategic preparedness and response package of IDB. And of course, PPP has a bunch of benefits to derive from this particular track. Now, in 2020, June, IDB actually issued or raised $1.5 billion worth of its first ever sustainability sukuk to tackle the aftermath of the COVID pandemic in its member countries. Of course, another 2.5 billion has been sustainability sukuk has also been issued this year. This will also feed into the sustainable recovery interventions for our member country. Now, to actually draw the, you hinted about drawing a parallel between the ethical foundations or principles of Islamic finance and the global environmental sustainability agenda and SDGs, of course. We know that, of course, one of the unexpected effects of the COVID is said to have been the reduced global CO2 emissions and adopting sustainable practices, both at businesses and other workplaces, right? Now, we know that focus has been basically placed on greening the recovery efforts. And this basically aligns with both the traditional stance or intervention of IDB in supporting IsDB's project. But we should know, of course, by design and foundational philosophy, Islam, based on what we call maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of Sharia, Islamic finance itself supports green and sustainable intervention. Initially, this basically happens through what we call the negative screening, where projects that have adverse environmental effects or uses materials that jeopardizes the health of living beings, humans, animals. You could just see biodiversity balance, basically. Now we've moved beyond the negative screening to what we call the positive screening, the affirmative voice used by IDB. Here we have our IsDB climate policy. We do have a sustainable finance framework in addition to our individual and collective disposition towards achieving the SDG with peer multilateral institutions like the World Bank, our member countries, as well as other development partners. The Islamic Development Bank Group also works with its member countries, in their drive towards meeting their respective nationally determined contributions in this restore and restart phases that we're actually in right now of the package. Now, in doing so, basically what we do is we focus on striking a balance between the country ownership and policy alignment with our member countries. Of course, there are other initiatives that actually feeds into the social aspect of the ESG in our intervention, our Zakah intervention, our social financing intervention. This actually supports the broader goals of social aspects of the ESG, and also supports wealth redistribution, lowers income inequality, and also enhances financial inclusion. We know that there's a loud consensus, so to speak, on the need to have private sector at the heart of developmental intervention. So the meaningful participation definitely is actually required. So IDB does this through attracting private capital, either through the A and B structures in our infrastructure PPP projects, or through de-risking the projects for participation of the private sector through guarantees and credit and political risk insurance, like I highlighted under the facilities.
Thank you, Hassan. I think in the interest of time, we will need to move on. But I think you've given a good overview of IDB's intentions, and let me see if we can come back to get your feedback on the templates in a bit if we have time. But I think I would like to move on now to get. I think we've heard from the MDBs now and seen that there's a consensus on the need to engage both the public and private sector, and especially in the wake of COVID-19 and the recovery efforts that are going on. So Nadir, I think I know that Uzbekistan, is not only the host country of the annual meeting this year, but also, there's a lot of recent interest in Islamic finance from Uzbekistan. I know I'm personally involved in a lot of initiatives on the Islamic banking side, on the capital markets. There's the Green Sukuk initiative that Matilda referred to, which we're jointly working with the UNDP. and also on the Islamic social finance. So given that you're part of the PPP agency in the Ministry of Finance, I would also kind of put two things, and again, with the request to be very focused and brief. What do you see as the emerging opportunities from a PPP and Islamic finance point of view? And then equally, where do you see the bottlenecks, and how can some of these be addressed, particularly through the support of the MDBs? Nadir.
Sorry, Nadir, before you speak, I just want to apologize to the delegates. We'll take probably another 10 minutes and try and wrap up. Apologies, we are running a little bit over the time. Thank you. Sorry, Nadir, for the end. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, Brother Yahya, for introduction, and thank you for the questions. In the interest of time, I won't be spending much time in introducing the PPPDA or the projects that we're working on, and just delve into the questions on hand themselves. Brother Yahya, you are absolutely right that Uzbekistan at present is having a tremendous interest in the Islamic finance. However, most of that interest is limited to the corporate finance side or the capital markets in general. So the one area where Islamic finance is lagging behind is probably project finance and the PPPs as a whole. However, I firmly believe from the PPPDA side that if more innovative solutions for Islamic finance in PPP were introduced, the interest in them would be great. Notwithstanding the fact that a number of participants in the in PPP projects are from traditional Islamic countries such as Middle East and Turkey, and that geography in the world, and the heritage and history of Uzbekistan itself would make PPP products, the Islamic finance products in PPP, very attractive. Now, the bottlenecks in PPP projects, I mean, post-COVID recovery in itself has kind of had been a double-sided coin effect, if you like. From one side, obviously, there was a lack of demand, as it was mentioned before, and there was a lack of the result of the COVID pandemics. Kind of the pandemic itself resulted in the lack of the financing options for both private and public participants in any of the projects. However, as rightly was mentioned before, that post-COVID pandemics, the economy needs to restart, and the PPPs at present provide the ideal opportunity to restart the whole economy for both public and private side. I mean, it's everybody knows that PPPs, the biggest role of PPPs is to close the investment gap for the governments. And do it efficiently, getting the participation of and expertise of the private sectors in order to eliminate all the inefficiencies and overspends in the projects. And so at present, PPPDA is working on a number of initiatives. I mean, our pipeline today stands at nearly $6 billion. However, it's increasing by day. New initiatives, new social initiatives are being introduced almost on the weekly basis. And we are working on different, and the PPPs cover almost all sectors of economy. I mean, the obvious ones that everyone knows and everyone is interested in is obviously the energy, where we are having quite a number of flagship projects. However, in communal services, in water and wastewater treatment plants, in healthcare, in education, both higher and public education, and in many different fields, we have the PPP projects of different sizes, and we are working on structuring new projects as well. So therefore, I mean, coming back to your question on where the bottlenecks are, the usual culprit is the availability of the financing. At present, Uzbekistan, both private and public sector is increasingly relying on IFI financing for PPP projects, and not just PPP projects, but any projects in general. However, we see more and more interest for the private partners to source financing from other sources as well. And the Islamic financing solutions would probably serve as a good alternative to the traditional sources of financing, which are limited in scope and which probably are going to be dilapidated as the projects and the development in Uzbekistan grows in general. So this would be my very short kind of answer to your questions.
Thank you, Nader. Much appreciated, and I think we need to get a perspective also from the private sector. And as you mentioned, you know, there's a great opportunity to learn from some of the success stories, and we have with us today here one of the success stories of a Islamic finance PPP project in the form of Foundation Wind Energy, and we are, you know, proud to have you know, the joint CFO of you know, two of the energy projects. So Sohail, I know that, you know, Pakistan, you know, energy is a critical issue and challenge that Pakistan is facing, and also there is a lot of emphasis under the new government on you know, green initiatives such as solar energy and wind energy and you know, tree plantation, etc. So if you can just very briefly touch upon, you know, the success story of wind Foundation Wind Energy. And then also, now that you've heard that, you know, at least in principle, the support is there from the likes of the World Bank and Islamic Development Bank, how do you see the prospects of a green recovery in the post-COVID era, and how can, you know, multilaterals do more than what you know, they're already doing? So over to you, Sohail. Sohail, I think
Assalamu alaikum everybody, and thank you very much to the Islamic Government Management for inviting me at this discussion forum and making me part of this esteemed panel discussion session. Yeah, Brother Yahya, you rightly mentioned that these projects are a great success story written by the Saudi Foundation with the great support from the Islamic Development Bank and Asian Development Bank. I must call it a success story because these are the first energy project in Pakistan with international financing from the multinationals, and these are the one of the pioneers in wind industry in Pakistan, which actually laid the foundation of wind energy sector in Pakistan. And by now we have a 24 wind projects of capacity of 1200 megawatt in operation, and 12 more projects are in the pipeline, in fact, in the construction phase of this work. So right now we are making around 5% of the energy mix of the Pakistan. And on top of that, these are the first Sharia compliant Islamic transit project in Pakistan. Although it was challenging to get through this at that period of time, but once we're done with this transaction, we won 3 international awards for this transaction. Including Pakistan and Middle Eastern Deal of the Year award for in 2011 and 12. Dear panelists, dear participants, apart from generation of 1400 gigawatt till now of clean energy, which is for the 500,000 individual per annum, and reducing carbon emission by 900 tons, these projects are doing many CSR activities in the outskirts of the project to, you can say, improve the socio-economic lifestyle of the project in the outskirts. These projects are providing clean water to the 7 villages in the vicinity, and these projects also started to give a microfinance loan during this pandemic to you can say support the unemployed individual of those areas. And we also distributed ration among the needy person around the project, and then we provided medical facilities to more than 15,000 patients around these villages. As these villages don't have access to the electricity, in this meeting, we provided them off-grid solar panels for the electricity generation, which is, you can say, helping 2,000 lights in that area. As you mentioned that, obviously these are the icebreaker for the wind industry sector in Pakistan. So it was natural to have some challenges as well. So we face a lot of challenges, and prominent among those was to get this transaction through the regulatory framework during the approval process, because most of the regulators and government agencies in Pakistan don't have any past experience for such a type of financing structure and Sharia compliant sort of terms and terminology. So we were forced to even engage the Ministry of Law at that time, and thankfully we went through, and obviously it is went as a great story for the wind sector in Pakistan. Regarding your question about the ISDB and World Bank contribution toward this sector and future contribution, I must say that this is the most suitable time for them to you can say participate in the financing to the private sector in Pakistan. Because as you mentioned that our current government is taking a lot of steps and thinking about the green energy and climate change is taken as a you can say element which can hurt the Pakistan in the future. So you might apprise participants must appreciate that a day before yesterday, Cabinet Committee of Energy in Pakistan has approved an indicative generation capacity expansion plan for the next 10 years from 2021 to 2030. And their focus is primarily on the renewable energy, clean energy, and balancing the basket price and substantial reduction in the carbon emission. Because we are as per the World Bank report, we are the 30th largest carbon emission producing countries, greenhouse gases. So we need to do a lot, and obviously previously we were you can say dependent on the imported fuel based power generation in Pakistan. So
thank you, sir. Thank you, Sohail. I guess in the interest of time, we'll have to leave it out at this point. But I think you've covered a lot of ground, and I think it gives a good indication, and it's been a validation of what we've been hearing from the previous speakers as well. So if Arif, if you can give me just 1 minute to just recap,
30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. So I think we've covered a lot of ground in the short span of time that we had. I think it's evident now that the way to address the financing gap is for the MDBs and governments to work with the private sector. I think we also established that Islamic finance has great potential to complement the conventional avenues of financing. However, there is a need for greater awareness and capacity building on how to put Islamic finance instruments to use in real projects. I think the guide is going to be very instrumental in doing that. And I think, the MDBs can play a more proactive role in providing greater comfort, to the public and private sector and in mitigating some of the risks. And I think these views are also validated by the panelists from the public and private sector. So I think I would just end with the positive note that, even though the socioeconomic challenges in the post-COVID era may be very daunting, I think the resilience of the human spirit and the ability to work together, I think offers the best hope for the future. So I think on that note, I'll just once again want to thank our keynote speaker, Imad, and the panelists, Fatuma, Hassan, Nader, and Sohail. And over to you, Arif. I think I stuck to my 30 seconds.
You took slightly longer. So anyway, very quickly, just to wrap up, clearly we've seen during the course of this forum that Islamic finance has a critical and can play a critical role in a post-COVID world. We've seen this also coming through in terms of the ISDB prize for impactful achievement in Islamic economics, in the session on multidimensional poverty, and now again in the session on PPPs. I want to apologize to all delegates and the panelists. We have gone beyond on the normal time that we had initially anticipated. Clearly, both areas, very key areas that we could speak on for hours and hours. Thank you to the panelists, for the keynote speakers, Sami, for your leadership, and then behind the scenes, the team from ISDBI and the team from TICA that have done a lot of work, a lot of tireless and thankless efforts going into this. So thank you from our side. Really, really appreciate all the hard work that's gone in. Look forward to hopefully seeing you all in person at the 16th ISDB Global Forum on Islamic Finance. Take care, stay safe, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.